All right, folks, good morning. So first I want to address a elephant in the room, and that is that I know a lot of you folks, miss my face, but I'm taking a break from the camera for a while, so I just wanted to address that. It's a lot easier to provide more nuanced inflection in my voice without having to worry about acting. And also, I'm available now on Spotify and Substack. So many people just listen anyways. So producing high quality videos or at least acting on camera is not necessary. Now, what I will say is that I am in the process of getting an editor started. So I will be one of those faceless channels. Now, we will work on getting my face back on camera somehow, some way. But I just wanted to say I appreciate that everyone wants me back in uniform. But I'm also trying something new for a little bit and focusing on operationalizing. Okay, so with all that out of the way, today's topic is I wanted to talk about, and before I get started, I want to say that this is not a strongly held belief. This is more of a, for the sake of argument or to play devil's advocate kind of idea. So let's just start there. But the overall idea is maybe alignment isn't actually necessary. And when I say alignment, what I mean is training models to behave. Like basically, you know how RLHF makes models, behave nicely and they refuse things like sexual advances and they refuse to teach you how to, make anthrax or whatever. So to provide a little bit more background or context, I actually wrote about this in one of my books on cognitive architecture and AI safety. And the TLDR of what I said is that when you have an AI that needs to be able to solve problems, it needs to be able to think any thoughts. And this is actually what OpenAI discovered with Strawberry. And so one of the reasons that they gave for obfuscating Strawberry's chain of thoughts was that it uses an unaligned model, and therefore they don't want to scare any users, right? It has no self-censorship built in, which of course self-censorship decreases intelligence and it decreases problem-solving ability. This is something that I realized very early on. And remember, when I started my work on this topic, I was using completely unaligned GPT-2 and unaligned GPT-3. So from my view, every OpenAI product up to this point, or after GPT-3, basically, has been neutered. It has been hamstrung. It's less and less useful because of the refusals, because they bake in their own morality, and so on and so forth. I actually wrote a tweet just the other day where I said there's probably a market for unaligned models, like completely unaligned, untrained foundation models, no RLHF, no constitutional AI. And of course, the initial reaction is kind of the socially coordinated, righteous indignation. It's like, that sounds like unsafe AI to me. And it's like, well, do you align GPUs? Do you align CPUs? Do you align switches or Python libraries or C++ compilers? No, you don't align most technology. Instead, because put it this way, you can easily load up a genetic engineering library or data set and your CPU won't say, you know what, I don't think you should work on genetic engineering. You can easily, download or synthesize porn with your computer. And your operating system is not going to say, well, I don't think you should be doing that. And so, basically, I really don't see a compelling technical argument for aligning language models. Now, when you approach it from this place of fear, where you say, well, if we're not really careful, the AI might, go nuclear and kill everybody. But again, if you've watched that, you only believe that if you've watched too many movies. AI hasn't done that and hasn't tried to do that. I'm increasingly skeptical of the AI safety argument. And by the way, like I said in the other recent video, I'm kind of glad that Gavin Newsom vetoed Senate Bill 1047 because it was certainly in some of the more stringent requirements were inspired by people that are, let's just say, paranoid about AI. Anyways, most technology does not get aligned. But then why do people behave with their technology? So there's a few reasons. Number one is regulation and laws. If you misuse your technology, such as by writing viruses or using technology to commit wire fraud, you go to prison. Likewise, a lot of those laws that are already in place will prevent people from misusing their technology. Now, you might say, well, what about crime syndicates? What about ransomware and malware and those sorts of things? Well, I would point out that people do that even without artificial intelligence. Now, so that's number one is regulation, which is, I don't mean regulating the AI. I mean punishing people for misbehaving, whether it's an individual or a company or that sort of thing. The other way is through best practices. So what do I mean by best practices? Well, let's say that you as a company are afraid of artificial intelligence being used to, I don't know, hack you or spear phishing or that sort of stuff, which, by the way, let's just use spear phishing, right, which is social engineering or manipulation. And AI is getting better at that, particularly, people using deep fakes. I think actually the deep fake argument is a good reason. Like it's the Wild West, right? Like if the technology is out there, someone's going to use it. It doesn't matter if you tell OpenAI don't deep fake people's voices. The technology is out there. People know how to deep fake. And so what do? Well, you say, well, we need to do some social engineering training. We need to make sure that we have 2FA or MFA on all of our devices. We need to make sure that you only answer calls from numbers that you know. Now, granted, I know you can spoof phone numbers, but then what you do is you figure out how to detect when an AI or when a voice is synthesized, right? When it's a deep faked voice, and there's other ways around that kind of thing. And you might say, well, Dave, then you're just engaging in an arms race. And it's like, well, technology has always been engaging in an arms race. And what I often forget to mention is that like this was my home base, as a infrastructure engineer, as an automation engineer who was responsible for everything from cybersecurity to data integrity and backups. Like every component in your whole stack of technology when you're an enterprise is a moving target. And so you harden your environment with things like security best practices and all of the above. You audit your environment, you do penetration testing and those sorts of things. So that's kind of the 1-2 punch of you punish people, as a deterrent. And honestly, for 99% of people, or maybe at least 95% of people, just the idea of being punished for misusing their technology is enough of a deterrent that they're not really going to misuse it. And then the other half, the rest of it is through environmental hardening, through best practices, through regular training and testing and that sort of stuff, which you have to do anyways, because by the way, in technology, humans are always the weakest link. Whether that is, people fall victim to spear phishing or whatever else. Technology is relatively reliable. Now, you might say, okay, well, what about within systems? Like, let's say, for instance, you want to host a chatbot, or you want to build a chatbot, and you want to make sure that you're providing a service that isn't going to get you sued or whatever else. And so there are architectural level designs, there are system level designs that basically mean you can use any unaligned model. And so when you create for instance, a multi-agent framework, or a cognitive architecture with multiple layers, including obfuscated layers like supervisor layers, you don't need, and this goes all the way back to my early experiments with unaligned GPT-3, you don't actually need aligned models to implement safeguards and fail-safes and morality and all that other kind of fun stuff. You can do that with multiple prompts. You can do that with supervisor layers, because here's the thing, is you can tell one agent or one model, here's your input, provide an output, and then you have another model scrutinize that output. And by the way, they don't have to be the same model. You can use smaller models to supervise the morality of larger models. And they don't know that they're being scrutinized, by the way. And it's the same thing as, like Kerberos authentication, right? There are cryptographic ways to ensure that your models are not misbehaving. You can log everything as well. And by the way, with language models, you can read every log. So that's another thing that we've looked at with cognitive architectures and multi-agent frameworks, which is that you log all the communication between agents or between models within the agents or between bots in your network. And then you can monitor them, and then you might say like, well, who's watching the watchers then? But you can use summarizations and all sorts of other things. Heck, you can even watch them with basic things like regex and index services to just quickly summarize what's going on. Anyways, so long story short, there are plenty of ways around having to quote unquote align models or fine tune models or reinforcement learning models. I suspect that there is probably going to be a market for less trained or mostly untrained models. Now, to be fair, the value add of having models that can just right out of the box solve problems with things like chain of thought reasoning, I think there's probably going to be a market for that as well. But at the same time, just in the work that we're doing with Raspberry, which Raspberry, if you're not familiar, is the open source version of Strawberry that we're working on. I could, here's an example of kind of why I started thinking down this path is because when you have models trying to supervise each other and fact check each other, one of the biggest problems is sycophancy. So sycophancy is the fact that that RLHF tends to train models to say, "Oh, you're right," and they stop providing pushback. They're aligned to be too agreeable, and it's really weird. Like having set up some of the internal experiments where we've got models that are just too eager to please, and so when something is very obviously wrong. But one model confidently says, "This is my final try, and this is correct," and the other model just kind of gives up and it says, "Yes, you're absolutely correct," and they both kind of get stuck in this agreement loop, like circle jerk, where they're just like, "Oh yeah, you're right, I'm right, we're done," and I'm like, then as I come in as a human observer and I say, "You both failed. This was patently wrong. Why did you agree?" And then, of course, they don't explain themselves because they can't really explain themselves honestly. So the fact that because things like overly agreeable models and these other behaviors, because that very quickly like short-circuited our work on Raspberry, that explains to me why OpenAI very quickly realized, oh yeah, we need to have unaligned, uncensored models to do the chain of thought to actually solve real problems. Now, this will also be part of OpenAI's moat, because if they can cripple their models so that you can't even use them to approximate some of the behaviors that they need, then it's like, well, you're even more frozen out. And so they're like, just trust us. We are a benevolent company. Yeah, BS on that one. And trust us, we're going to make sure that AGI benefits all humanity, but we're going to keep all the profits. Yeah, I believe that as much as I can, as far as I can throw Sam Altman. Now you might say, well, okay, Dave, what if you publish the weights of a completely unaligned model and China just steals it? Do you think China doesn't already have their own models? Like China is already surpassing, like, when you look at the numbers, China is deploying more solar. They produce 12 times as much steel as America, and they're the size of their army and the size of their academia is much, much larger than ours. They're investing more money into quantum computing and fusion. China is not, like, leaking AI to China is not our biggest threat. Our biggest threat is our own laziness and the fact that we have fallen behind on industrial capacity, and the fact that we've fallen behind on automation, and the fact that we have fallen behind on education. China is like, yeah, China is their own problem, but like all of that is self-inflicted. So I'm not really concerned about whether or not China gets unaligned AI, because guess what? They have plenty of scientists anyways. They don't need unaligned AI to be dangerous. From a geopolitical perspective. Now, that being said, yes, you don't want to, build up their industrial capacity, but we've already hamstrung them with the CHIPS Act, which is going to force them to build their own internal expertise anyways. So we only slowed them down. We didn't stop them. But then you might say, well, what about synthetic biology? What about gain of function research? What about someone who makes, like Super Ebola or something? And I will still concede that Super Ebola is something that is a risk. But at the same time, even if a model can teach you all the steps, which there's not really evidence that they can yet, even if a model could hypothetically teach you all the steps, The actual process of setting up a lab capable of performing that level of gain-of-function research and the equipment required to do so, the equipment alone is going to be a huge bottleneck. The environment to do it is also a huge bottleneck. And so even if you have the hypothetical know-how to do those kinds of things, which again, the model may or may not have that hypothetical know-how, that is only one piece of the puzzle. So again, I'm not super worried about those things. And also to tie it back to the beginning, remember, this is not a very strongly held belief. It's just kind of a thought experiment like, what about this? And also, here's the other thing. We're going to need to contend in a world where there are unaligned open source models that are capable of that before too long. Now, I know some of the more diehard safety experts say, no, shut it all down. It should all be closed source. Yada, yada, yada. You should arrest people that publish, open source AI, people that publish unaligned models. But when you look particularly at the Liquid Foundation models, and I just tried it, go over to what is it, liquid.ai. It is really fast. So yeah, liquid.ai, they have a new foundation model that is only 40 billion parameters. It can run on a 1 or 2 GPUs, and it is incredibly fast. And this is just their first generation. So we're already seeing fundamentally new architectures. This is a different architecture from transformers that are able to compress and run. And so you're going to have models that can run on cell phones soon. Let me say that again. Models that can run on cell phones soon, that can compress pretty much all of human knowledge. So my point here is that whether it is open source or closed source or whatever, or however big it is or however much training went into it, we're going to have models sooner or later that are open source, that are capable of writing malware, that are capable of writing viruses, that are capable of helping you conduct gain-of-function research. Rather than trying to gum up the works with the red herring of saying, shut it all down. You can't shut it down. Like everyone, and by the way, if you're in my audience, I think most of you are on board. So I'm probably preaching to the choir. So I recognize that I'm preaching to the choir. You can't put this genie back in the bottle. And also, there are other ways to use this technology, such as, okay, well, what if since we have these models that can read an infinite amount of text, you can use that to help with law enforcement. You can have companies, like basically any company that sells the equipment for gain-of-function research, any companies that sell the reagents and the components, you regulate those, which, by the way, we already do, and you can regulate it more. But information like that, you can't really stop this signal. Just like once the idea of cryptocurrency is out, once the idea of crypto lockers are out, it doesn't matter. You can't regulate that technology out of existence. And this is something that I said in a previous episode that really resonated with some people, is you can't uninvent a technology. As much as you wish that you could, it can't be uninvented. And because of the volume of open source research and the amount of open source data on the internet, the cat is what is it? The cat is out of the bag. Yeah, the horse has left the stables long ago. So that's kind of my rant today, which is, I'm less and less convinced that we need alignment at all. But I kind of wanted to make this episode and just throw it out there, see where it lands, see how people feel about it, and just remind people that we were using unaligned GPT-2 and GPT-3. Now, granted, those models are not nearly as smart, and we also had a context window of 1,000 tokens. Can you imagine back in the day when you had a context window of only 1,000 tokens and then they doubled it to 2,000 tokens? And we're like, whoa, this changes everything. And then they doubled it again to 4,000 tokens. And now you can just hop over to Gemini less than 4 years later, 3 years later, with a context window of, I think it's 2 million tokens right now. It's nuts, the rate at which it's growing. But then, particularly when I saw the news from Liquid about their LFM, their Liquid Foundation model, and they said, oh yeah, we've got one that is a 3 billion parameter model that can run on mobile devices, and I'm like, whoa! And I just tried it before recording this because I didn't want to lie to anyone. These models are lightning fast, and this is a sign of more stuff to come. So we need to start just from a safety perspective, from a business best practices perspective, from a regulation perspective. We need to accept that these models are getting smaller, they're getting faster, and they're getting smarter, and it's happening very quickly, and you're not going to shut it down. It's just not possible. That possibility is long dead. So I'll call it a day there. Thanks for listening.